If you could drill like a perfect geothermal well every time and you had that confidence every time, like 5,000 feet, 8,000 feet down, you hit 350, 400 F, and it's incredibly productive. It flows at very high flow rates, a combination of brines and steam. If you could do that over and over again, it's the cheapest form of power, period. It's very, very low cost stuff.
Hardware to Save a Planet explores the technical innovations that are giving us hope in the fight against climate change. Each episode focuses on a specific climate challenge and explores an emerging physical technology solution with the person bringing it into reality. I'm your host, Dylan Garrett. Hardware to Save a Planet is brought to you by Synapse. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to Hardware to Save a Planet. I'm happy to be joined today by Joel Edwards, the CTO and co-founder of Zanskar. Zanskar is using custom-built AI and geoscience to enable the efficient discovery of overlooked geothermal resources. Unlike a lot of the geothermal startups in the news today, these resources can be tapped with existing drilling technology, which means getting to more clean baseload power faster. I've been excited to do another episode on geothermal because it's one of the most promising options we have for meeting the coming wave of data center power demand. A report from Rhodium Group last year estimated it could serve 64% of that demand, which is pretty huge. One thing that piqued my interest about what Zanskar is doing is the speed at which their solution could make an impact. Joel has a PhD in earth sciences from UC Santa Cruz. He really knows his stuff, so I'm excited to learn more from him about geothermal in general and Zanskar's approach. Joel, thanks a lot for joining. It's good to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. Nice to be here.
So I actually wanted to start by just getting some background and context on geothermal in general. It seems like from what I've read and kind of my experience over the years, it sort of took a backseat to wind and solar for decades, really, despite having what look like on paper to be really, attractive benefits, right? Like it's low land use, low material requirements, kind of it doesn't have this intermittency issue that solar and wind have. And then now it seems like it's kind of having a moment, maybe with the data center demand and this kind of thing. I'm curious to hear your perspective on, what is that history? What's going on with geothermal that led to slower growth back then, and why is it sort of getting more attention now?
Yeah, maybe the long of the short of it is geothermal sort of took off in the 60s and 70s. And by the sort of end of the 70s, early 80s, there was a lot more geothermal capacity online than there was wind and solar. Like geothermal was sort of the big dog at the time. But natural gas prices kind of came down in the 80s, and the power prices came down with it. And the oil and gas groups, which had been financing all of the geothermal development in the Western US, they sort of went back to their core business model and got out of the geothermal game. And then geothermal was basically sideways for a few decades after that. So those oil and gas groups were like Chevron, Hunt, Phillips, Unocal, some of the classics. They financed like billions of dollars in inflation-adjusted dollars into geothermal projects in that like 1960s to like early 1980s wave, when we built like 2/3 or more of today's capacity. And then since then, yeah.
That was like just a sort of a diversification strategy for them?
It was an attractive price market. There was attractive tariffs at the time. And also in 1970, the United States government passed the Geothermal Steam Act, which set up a framework by which the federal government could lease geothermal rights. And before then, there wasn't that framework in place. And the reason that matters is because geothermal resources exist in the western third of the country. So from Colorado to California, Idaho down to New Mexico, the majority of that land is owned by the federal government. So de facto, the federal government owns the majority of the geothermal resources. And so until there was like a legal framework in place also, there was no mechanism for geothermal companies to go out and get the rights to access geothermal resources. So the combination of like an attractive price environment and then a legal framework to do it And then probably that like first few fields to get online and to see how they performed. So the Geysers field in California came online in the 1960s. And it was just, it's a dry steam field. So it's very low cost, very power dense. And the oil and gas majors got really excited about it, thinking there's probably other geysers fields out there. So they kicked off these huge exploration campaigns across the West and built a ton of capacity that is still generating power to this day. So America's first production well it ever drilled and completed was in 1960s at the geysers. And that well still feeds steam to power plants to this day. So I think that like early getting those first fields off the ground, attractive price environment, getting a legal framework in place and so forth. That was probably that early boom. And then the oil majors got out of the business. It kind of went sideways for a few decades. Then the Obama years came around, and there was a lot of interest in climate solutions, and there was some federal funding that came into geothermal. Again, it was a good, attractive price environment. Natural gas prices were up, so power prices were up and so forth. So there was a really small little baby boom in that like 2008 to 2012 era. That's when I got my first gig in geothermal. And then wind and solar prices started to come down. They started to hit economies of scale, and power prices started to come down, and geothermal's power prices didn't come down fast enough. And so basically geothermal lost to wind and solar. And then so for the next decade, it's been really flat after that.
And what was preventing geothermal from kind of following that same cost curve?
Yeah, geothermal has a subsurface risk element to it. You can drill incredible wells. You can also drill wells that have no productivity at all. And frankly, the oil and gas majors that did geothermal in the 1970s, they didn't exactly know what they were looking for, but they had very talented geologists and drilling engineers, and they were actually pretty good for what they knew at the time. The group that kind of did that mini 2008, 2012 wave, they are not as well financed. They were like small little developer shops. They maybe had a geologist on staff. Like these were not well financed, great, deep benches of teams like pursuing these projects. They were like really scraping by. And so I think not a lot of great science behind it. And some of those projects didn't work out, and it didn't make sense. After that little boom happened, that's how I got into geothermal. There was a bunch of DOE funding into some of the universities and the labs, and that kicked off this little mini wave of research into like, how do we find these systems cheaper and faster and with more precision? And then what do these systems look like underground, like building like really robust conceptual frameworks. And a lot of that DOE funded work, I think has kind of bled into what we're doing now, and has sort of like enabled us to go after these systems again with a little bit more precision.
Yeah. And I know you can probably go super deep in this as a earth science guy, but tell me more about what when we talk about geothermal resources, what does that actually mean? What are we looking at or looking for underground?
Yeah, you're just looking for these like hotspots. You can think of them like, this is not the right term, but like a pimple. Like, it's like there's these little pimples or these little what's the word? What's that cookie with like raisins? Little raisin cookie. Like you have these little
like
pockets.
An oatmeal raisin cookie?
Yeah, raisin cookie. Yeah, raisin cookie. It's the little raisins in the cookie. It's just like extraordinary like pockets of like high temperature brines or steam that if you drill them in the right locations can be incredibly power dense and productive. And so it's kind of a needle in a haystack problem. Like over and over and over again, you scan large areas and you're looking for something that has a relatively small footprint at the scale that you're exploring. So these systems are like, their footprints are on the scale of like a few square kilometers to maybe low teens in square kilometers. They're just not that big. They're easy to miss. And the majority of these systems are hidden. So there's nothing at the surface to tell you it's there. There's no hot springs, no fumaroles or whatever. So they're easy to miss systems and so forth. So it's a needle in a haystack problem. It's if it's a needle in a haystack problem, like how many holes are you going to have to drill before you find these things kind of problem. And so you just want to build a suite of tools that allows you to be a little bit more precise in where you explore and where you collect your data, so you just have higher success rates.
Yeah. And because one thing I remember from other conversations I've had about geothermal is like that exploration process is a big part of the total cost of installing a new geothermal well. Is that the right way to think about it?
That's a big part of it. Just the number of like less productive or unproductive wells that you drill, they get rolled into the total project cost. And then the other big part of it is that the uncertainty that creates when you go to the financial markets and you say, I want $100 million to do geothermal. And they're like, that's a super risky enterprise and blah, blah, blah. So we're going to assign really high cost of capital. So you have that risk, you have the uncertainty, and it drives higher cost of capital. And the combination of those two drive up the power prices. If you could drill like a perfect geothermal well every time and you had that confidence every time, like, I don't know, 5,000 feet, 8,000 feet down, you hit 350, 400 F, and it's incredibly productive. It flows at very high flow rates, a combination of brine steam. Like, if you could do that over and over again, it's the cheapest form of power, period. It's very, very low cost stuff. It's once you know where to drill, once you know how to, get into the system and utilize it. That Geysers field in California, that first field that came on in the 1960s, I mean, they were selling power out of that field in like the high teens dollars per megawatt hour, like very low cost stuff, and it worked at that price. So, yeah, it's that subsurface risk element and the cost of capital element that makes it a little bit more expensive.
Yeah, right. In the geysers example, it was like, I imagine it was pretty clear where the raisin was. It was like coming out on the surface. Like, let's just go right there.
That's right.
But it sounds like we've probably tapped all the easy ones.
Yeah. Have you ever been up there, like Santa Rosa area?
I don't think I have.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh no, I have. Yeah, actually. Yeah. I have driven past that. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like there was literally a town called Geyserville. Like, I mean, it was hillsides that had like geysers. Just an extraordinary system, a natural wonder, so to speak, super obvious where to go and drill those holes.
Right. Okay. But once you've sort of gotten all the low hanging fruit, then you're into trying to find the underground ones, and you get into the exploration. And just to kind of orient myself, we're talking about, I guess, conventional geothermal, and then a lot of the new startups that I kind of referred to in my intro are EGS, or enhanced geothermal systems, right? And if I have this, correct me if I have this wrong, but I think it's, in those cases there aren't sort of pockets of hot water and brine, and you're actually looking for just like dry hot rock, and then you're adding your working fluid. You're like injecting your working fluid after you drill the well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Basically, you swap out exploration risk for engineering risk.
Okay. So you're more likely to find the hot rock, but then you don't have the kind of working fluid, and that adds engineering risk. You
have the working fluid, it's just water. But you have to set up a system where you can inject that water underground, it flows through the rocks, heats up, and then it comes back up your other well. So that's the engineering risk piece, is you have to engineer that system into the rocks.
Right. And this is where we get into like fracking techniques and things to open up porosity in the rocks that can, so your water can kind of flow through the hot rock and transfer the heat.
Exactly right. Yeah. So you're sort of swapping out. You're saying, I'm going to delete exploration risk. I don't want any of that. I'll take engineering risk, and then I will just pay more upfront. Like, to go in and set up that system and to frack it open, that's a more expensive well field. Like, in every case, right? It's never cheaper to go in and frack. I mean, you see that in the cost of unconventional oil and gas, right? Shale gas in West Texas or in the Bakken in North Dakota, that oil and gas is always more expensive than conventional oil and gas. Like, the oil and gas coming out of the Ghawar field in Saudi Arabia is the cheapest oil and gas in the world. Those are conventional well fields. They flow with vertical wells. You don't have to do all the engineering to that well field. So you're just sort of swapping. You're saying exploration risk is unacceptable. I'm going to engineer these systems and I'm just going to pay more up front. So I have a higher chance of getting what I want. And then betting that you can come down the cost curve associated with the engineering costs.
Okay. So it's more predictable, but you're sort of starting with a higher base cost.
You're starting with a higher base costs, and they're probably, we don't quite know this yet because we don't have a full-scale EGS system up and running, but they're probably higher cost to operate. You have to push harder to get the water to flow through that network of cracks. So that increases your parasitic costs and so forth. So probably on the operational side as well, it's a little bit more expensive. But the argument from their piece is, well, we're going to just hit economies of scale and we're going to get cheaper cost of capital faster. And so we're going to make up for it in that direction. I think for us, our thesis is, look, like the best, conventional geothermal, natural geothermal systems out there, like haven't even been found yet. And a really easy example of that is the biggest geothermal field in the Intermountain West is a field called McGinnis Hills, and it's in central Nevada. And it was found on accident by a gold exploration company in the 1990s. And now it's generating like 150 megawatts of power at a very low cost, right? So if we can go out and find really big hidden systems, and then we get all the cost benefits of like, this is really cheap geothermal power, like that's the bet we're making. And we're making that bet because we've built a class of models that have learned how to find these systems better than humans.
Yeah. And I definitely want to hear more about that process. What is it that gives you confidence that they exist if they're all hidden? How do we know that?
Yeah, I mean, there's some like simple back of the envelope stuff you can look at, but just spatial statistics. If you look in the Intermountain West where these systems live, and you just look at where any type of well has been drilled, it could be water, oil and gas, mineral, geothermal, whatever, we've actually sampled a very small portion of the Intermountain West because not many people live out there. There's not great oil and gas resources out there. There's not like an incentive to go out there and sample all of that ground. So there's an incredible amount of ground to go explore. So that's the first order approximation. When we got started on this, we looked at that and said, wow, okay. And then two is that we've been now exploring we've had field crews in the field since 2021, more or less. So we're coming up on 5 years of boots on the ground exploration. And we've found dozens of hidden sites that nobody knows about. And some of these sites are huge. Like, the one we announced, Big Blind in Western Nevada, is a very, very large system. You could send a geologist out there. You could walk out there. You'd walk right over the top of the thing. You'd have no idea that it was there. So I guess in just the few years that we've been doing this and exploring, we've already found enough to sort of convince ourselves like, oh yeah, this is going to work. There's stuff out there to find.
Yeah. And the conventional wells, so you described the enhanced geothermal systems. You're actually forcing the water down through the rock. The conventional wells, are you just extracting the hot brine or the hot water from that hot spot until it's done and it's depleted, and then you move on to the next one? Is that how it works, or are you somehow like recirculating it or something?
You recirculate it. You put all that water back down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So essentially,
you're not, but it does deplete at some point, right? Or you've kind of used up all the heat.
No, all of the operating geothermal fields in the Western U.S. are conventional fields, and they're all still operating. Some of those came on in the 1960s. None of them have turned off. If you manage these reservoirs appropriately, there's tons of heat down there, probably centuries worth of heat to extract. There's been some failure cases where basically you can suck that hot water out of the system, and if you don't put it back into the system, you'll deplete it. Alternatively, if you put it back into the system and it's too close, you'll short circuit it and you'll cool off your production. So you kind of have to find a sweet spot between the two. And those fields that have found that sweet spot, they're like stable over decades.
Okay, cool. So yeah, tell me more about the exploration process. It's not, you've got people out in the field doing this. How do you know where to send them in the first place, and then what are they doing out on the ground?
Yeah, we have this like little geothermal flywheel spinning where we set up these models, and we set up a model framework. Basically, we put these boundary conditions on the model, and we put in like basically a learning algorithm so that the model can kind of teach itself. And then we let that model teach itself against training data. And the training data are simply sites where we know geothermal exists and where we know it doesn't exist, these hotspots. And then we let those models kind of build their own relationships across different geologic types of data. And these data can come from satellites, on instruments on satellites, they can come from instruments on our airplanes, and they come from, instruments that people carry around on the ground. But these are like many different types of geologic data or data that tell you about the underground world, but they don't tell you directly if a geothermal system is there or not. But if you look at like complex relationships within those data, you can start, the models will start to learn that, these types of features in these combinations have some signal associated with geothermal. And so then the models will start to spit out these maps of predictions of where geothermal systems might exist away from the training data. And then you send your field teams out, they collect data at that site, and what they're looking for is excess heat coming out of the ground at that location. If that ground is hotter than it should be, then there's a system there. If the ground is background, then there's not a system there. And then we feed those results back in, and the model retrains itself. And then you come up with a new map and a new set of predictions, and then you go out there and test those predictions, and so forth.
And can you say more about the kind of data that is being ingested? Is it the types of minerals, the sort of topology of the land, like what's available out there that's feeding into these models?
Yeah, exactly. Like directionally, you're right. This is it's any type of like geospatial data that has some sort of relationship to like the underground world. And, so quick examples are like, obviously like rock types, right? There's geophysical data, like you can measure the magnetic properties of rocks. You can measure the electrical properties of rocks. You can measure the density of rocks indirectly with different types of geophysical instruments and so forth. There's quite a bit of breadth in the types of geologic data that have some sort of relationship with geothermal systems. And these models that have been like learning on their own is like they have inferred some relationships that like are counterintuitive in some ways, and they've made predictions that are counterintuitive. And we have found systems in really surprising spots that you look in hindsight and you're like, wow, why was it there and not over there? Yeah. So, which also tells you that like at a first principles level, there's still some gap in our understandings of like how these systems form and how they evolve and how they die. That hopefully we will learn as a consequence of all this work, in the long term. Maybe that'll be some of the scientific benefits.
Yeah. Is there something that has changed about our AI techniques that is enabling you to do what you're doing today, or is it more about just you've had insights into how to use existing kind of AI techniques?
Well, I mean, AlexNet, was published in like 2012, right? And that set off this like little Cambrian explosion of like AI use cases and so forth. So it hasn't really been that long since AI came or was born in sort of a way that worked. AI has been around for longer than that, but no, I mean, It's a great question. I will say in the early days when we built our first set of predictions, where the models kind of learn themselves, those models were not great. And some of it was our fault, just the way we set up the model parameter space and the learning mechanisms in that model space on how it was teaching itself. It was, it was hallucinating or whatever. It had like, there's these spatial issues and, contamination issues that can bleed into these models. And so we kind of had to learn how to set up that model space. And then we just over the course of 4 or 5 years, we've collected such large volumes of data. Like we've explored more than 5 or 6 million acres in 4 to 5 years. And that like volume of data just feeding back into these models, you can start to see the models start to, and that has to do with like, these models really struggle with like some sorts of spatial problems. And so I think just the combination of like building a better model space that it can learn in, and then also feeding it a lot more data, has been sort of the 2 key factors here.
Mm-hmm. And then on the ground, you've the model kind of predicts maybe there's something in this area. You go to the ground, you're measuring the temperature. Is there some drilling involved in that? Some exploration involved to say, okay, we're looking for like a temperature gradient or something of a certain profile in a certain area. Is that what's happening, or what does it look like on the ground?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. We're measuring how much heat's coming out of the ground at that location and comparing that to background and seeing if there's something in
that
excess.
Involves some drilling, like you're drilling with some temperature sensors and doing kind of exploratory holes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so you want to be precise in where you go, right? There's costs to being in the field. There's permitting costs and there's access costs and all the things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Got it. But you're doing it, and so at that point when you're drilling, is that the same process as a kind of pre-Zanskar exploration? And so really the value you add is knowing where to drill those exploratory holes, or is there anything different you're doing at that point where you're starting to do exploration in a specific spot?
We've punched enough of these holes that we've gotten really cheap at it and fast. So we have driven down those costs quite a bit. So I do know we are much cheaper than our predecessors. But yeah, directionally, like the oil and gas majors were out there punching holes back in the 70s looking for these systems. And those data are publicly available today. You can go look at where they punched holes. And some of those groups were just sort of punching holes like in a pattern, like every certain distance. So there wasn't like geologic precision there. It was just like they were just broadly sampling the space. And obviously that's expensive. And some of them like got obsessed with certain areas and just like punched so many holes in the same areas and just like couldn't find, like, it's funny to look back at what they were doing. Like they were using paper maps and just figuring this all out in real time, to their credit. Yeah.
And you've already had some success doing this, right? You've discovered, well, you said you've discovered, what did you call it? The blind?
Yeah. Big blind. It's a poker term.
Big blind. Yeah. Okay. Right. Can you kind of quantify somehow, like the impact of what you're doing financially? What does it actually mean in terms of sort of total cost of getting this energy online?
Yeah. And a couple quick stats. We have found more new hotspots in the last 3 years than the industry's found in 30. And at this point, we've found more new hotspots than any explorer ever in the US. So we've found a lot of sites at a very small fraction of the costs that those oil majors were spending to find their sites, inflation adjusted. So just the dollar has gone a lot farther for us. The combination of being more precise in where we go, learning, the model's getting better and better over time, and then driving down our data collection costs by bringing it in-house. We do a lot of stuff in-house. Those two axes have really driven down the costs. So, we not rule of thumb, but order of magnitude, you could say like the oil majors were finding, new hotspots at a cost of somewhere between $100,000 to $200,000 per megawatt, and we're finding them somewhere between $10,000 to $20,000 per megawatt, something like that. So we have reduced the cost per megawatt by an order of magnitude, something like directionally. That's right. And of course, we don't have access to their books, so we're building models and assumptions of how much their costs were, inflation adjusted. But I think directionally that's right. And then the other piece is like by finding all these new systems, people, what you'll find is if you look on Twitter or whatever, if you look at all these, third-party reports on geothermal, almost all these third-party reports open up their statements and say, conventional geothermal is very limited. There's no upside. All the good stuff's been tapped. There's nothing more to find. It's like very peak oil mindset. It's like we found it all. And so by us going out there and finding all these new sites, like we're kind of proving that hypothesis incorrect for ourselves. And we haven't published most of what we found. So we will be publishing these things, over time. And so hopefully we can reverse that narrative. But
yeah. And then what does it mean to actually like make that power available to the grid or to a data center or something like this? Because you don't control where it is, right? It could be anywhere. And then you got to get it from there to, I assume then we're not just building data centers wherever you happen to find it. Like what does that look like?
Yeah, there's an interconnection process, right? You got to do the system impact studies where they look at how your project would interconnect into the grid system. And that's really, there's two major bottlenecks for geothermal, I would say. One is interconnection. So most of this resource base is between Colorado and California, and the interconnection process in that part of the US is very slow and very expensive. The interconnection timelines are often like 5-ish years or longer. Of course, there's lots of like discussion right now about how can we speed that up. If we were finding these systems in Texas, we would be interconnecting a lot faster. And then of course there's the permitting piece. Like a lot of these projects touch federal lands. You got to go through a federal permitting process. That's many, many steps, and each step has some amount of duration to it. So cumulatively over all those steps, it's a very slow process. But directionally, obviously, both parties have talked a lot about cutting red tape. Geothermal is one of those that would just benefit tremendously by cutting red tape. And in the last 12 months, they did cut some red tape on the front end, which is it's already helped us quite a bit. So yeah, the process is you find the hotspot, you got to figure out a way to lease it, get the rights to go drill it. And then you've got to permit all your activities. You've got to go through an interconnection study. You've got to drill a well field and then build a surface facility and tie this thing into the grid. So yeah, for our greenfield projects, our first batch of greenfield projects, the sites we've announced publicly, Pumpernickel and Big Blind, and then we'll have a few more that we announced this year. We're targeting like a 3 to 5 year timeline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't sound crazy. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, both parties are really engaged and interested in getting these projects to move faster. So it's really nice to be loved, by our political system. And so hopefully that comes to bear. The Fervo project has come online pretty fast, right? That Cape Station project, their first phase is coming online end of this year. That's pretty fast. I think that's like a 3 to 4 year timeline. So hopefully we'll have the same luck.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Does the kind of like you mentioned, permitting on federal lands and the interconnection complexity, does that play into your exploration? Do you kind of consider that when you're thinking, okay, we're going to look here and not there, and you're not just looking at geology?
Yeah, for sure. We're not exploring national parks.
Yeah.
We're not exploring
Yeah. Right.
certain conserved areas. That's
Yeah.
not going to
Yeah.
happen. And then
Yeah. That makes sense.
we have found sites that are pretty remote and are going to be expensive to interconnect. So we'll see how those shake out. So some of these places are really out there in the sticks. But some of them are not. We've found some pretty close to infrastructure. So those ones will probably come online faster than the really, really remote ones. Yeah. But the other piece of the AI story that's like equally as exciting is, and it's a different suite of AI tools. But once you find a hotspot, you still have all that uncertainty of like, where do you drill into that hotspot? Because these systems, they have different like shapes and geometries and so forth. And so,
yeah, I was wondering about that. Yeah.
Yeah, you still have those dry hole risks even when you've found a hotspot. So that's where we built kind of a different class of AI models. And essentially, what we do there is we simulate a broad range of possible orientations and geometries of the underground system that's constrained by physics, what's physically possible in terms of how these systems could be oriented, and then it's constrained by the data we have on the site. And what that does is it gets you out of like what are called local minima traps. When you have a human build a model of a system, they will build a single model that's physically realistic and fits data. But that doesn't mean that model is correct, that's the real system and how it really looks. You want to build all the possible models of all of the possible systems and how it looks. It's sort of like the problem is sort of like predicting the future. Where like currently right now, there's a wide range of possible futures. It's not infinite. Like I'm almost 40 years old. I'm not going to do certain things. Like those are not in the future space. But there's some broad range of what's possible in the future for me. And you want to like simulate across those possible futures. That's what we do underground. We want to simulate across all of the possible orientations of a system, given the data we have in physics. And that's where the AI piece comes in. And then you can kind of strategize and plan, where am I going to collect data and how am I going to drill into this system, given all these possible orientations. And we did this. We've done this now at a couple sites. The first site we did it at was a site called Lightning Dock in New Mexico. And this is the only geothermal power plant in New Mexico. And we bought this power plant a couple of years ago, and it was having reservoir issues. And they had hired all the consultants in the industry, and everybody had come looked at the system. And basically, everybody had come to the conclusion, this is a small system. It's going to have performance issues, yada, yada, yada. So they decided to sell it. We bought it, and we got in there, and we started building these models. And the models were saying, actually, there is a range of possible scenarios where this system's a lot bigger at depth. And so we planned, designed, permitted a new production well, and we drilled that production well and completed it last year. And then we plugged that thing into the power plant. And that well now has been feeding that power plant for 9 months. And it is the most productive pumped geothermal well in the country.
Wow.
That's out of hundreds of wells.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an incredible well. Like it's 10 mega, like huh. It's the only production well feeding that plant, and it is maxed out that plant.
Wow. That's
so
awesome.
Yeah,
so that's
exciting.
That's just about really understanding almost like the geometry of the hot spot.
Exactly.
And knowing where to drill into it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how do you make money? What's the business model? Do you then develop these sites and own and operate geothermal systems, or what's the business model?
Yeah, we own and operate that power plant in New Mexico. So we sell electricity to PNM, which is it's an investor-owned utility that services Albuquerque and those areas. So they're the offtake there. And then for these new projects that will be coming online, they will be contracted to an off-taker or a series of off-takers. So we will build and construct, and we will sell the power to some set of customers. So that's the business model.
I'm curious as we look like down the road a little bit. There's so much noise right now about all this kind of crazy demand for power from the projected data center boom and stuff. I've heard that we're already producing some crazy number of new like natural gas powered turbines to support all of that. You're talking about all these interconnection challenges and stuff. Are we able to move fast enough with geothermal? Even though you've found like one of the fastest ways to do this, it sounds like. What does that future look like? Are we moving fast enough to actually support a meaningful amount of that demand with clean power, or not?
Yeah, we are behind the demand curve right now, for sure. That's why power prices, on an average basis across the nation, inflation adjusted, have gone up. We're in Utah. Our power prices against inflation are actually probably just slightly below inflation, but for the most part across the country, power prices have gone up. So we are behind the demand curve currently. Like you said, like natural gas is growing pretty quickly right now. On the geothermal side, I can tell you we are hustling. And for the first batch of plants, we don't have supply chain issues. When we get to the next batches of plants at the scale that we're planning on moving, we might run into supply chain issues. We will see. But that's a good problem, I think, because it means that your supply chains are growing and getting stronger. Like one of the issues with geothermal is we're so small that we just have like pretty small and expensive supply chains. Our turbines are more expensive than natural gas turbines on a per megawatt basis, right? Our heat exchangers are more expensive than their heat exchangers on a per unit of heat basis. We need to scale up to drive down the cost of our surface facilities. I think that'll be a little painful in that scaling, but it will bring in like the GE Vernovas of the world to start thinking about geothermal, right? Right now, we're not big enough to matter to them. Hopefully in 1, 2, 3 years, we start to get big enough. They're like, okay, this is an order book we want to negotiate and fill and so forth. So
interesting.
I think we're still on
right now. You're dealing with a totally different supply base and stuff.
Totally, like niche small suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
That they have enough inventory for what we're trying to build in the first tranche, but when we get to that second and third and fourth tranche, at that scale, the numbers that we're planning on, it's like, okay, hopefully we're going to pull in these bigger, the big boys, maybe is the right term. Yeah, and when we get to those economies of scale, I think we can get our power plant costs down to be more competitive with natural gas.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I hadn't thought about the kind of how different the sort of power plant equipment would be. You're dealing with a different supply chain that's not as mature and high volume as like natural gas powered plants.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. Okay. And then do you think we'll have a mix of a kind of enhanced geothermal and conventional in the long run, or is one clearly going to win out over the other?
No, it'll be a mix. It'll be it's a lot like oil and gas. It's a lot like, minerals. In both of those spaces, those industries started with conventional assets, which are high margin. And then eventually they moved to unconventional operations, but there's still a blend of the two in both. So you still have Saudi Arabia that's producing conventional oil and gas. Then you have the Permian Basin and the Bakken and the Marcellus that's producing unconventional oil and gas in the marketplace. And there's a distribution of production costs across those, but you have both. And I think you will have the same in geothermal for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, I shouldn't say for sure. That's not the right word. I think you will have my prediction of the future
That's the prediction.
is that we will have both.
Many different ways the future could go. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And I have not simulated all the possible futures
Yeah,
yet, but
exactly.
yeah.
What's your vision for the total impact Zanskar could have? Do you have kind of a, in gigawatts or something? What is the what size of bite out of the total problem can you take, you think?
Yeah, I can tell you we're going for it. We're drilling lots of holes. We're exploring a ton of acreage. We've put a really good portfolio of prospects together. We're going for it. The goal is to hit a gigawatt installed capacity and operating within 10 years. So we're shooting for that sort of end of 2034, end of 2035. That first gigawatt is going to be the hardest, I think. I don't know. I've never built 10 gigawatts or 100 gigawatts. I don't know. But like it's that 0 to 1 problem. We've gotten to 10 megawatts. So right now we're generating 10 megawatts net to the grid. So we need to go from 10 megawatts net to a gigawatt. And the target is to do that, within 10 years. And then we'll see from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I know there are plenty of systems to support that growth. It's a matter of, executing and going for it. And I think with this Series C funding, we have a really nice bench of committed investors. They're really excited about what happened at Lightning Dock, right? Which is an incredible outcome. Really excited about what happened at Pumpernickel and Big Blind with our intermediate drilling and confirming that those can support power plants. That was really exciting. So so far we've had a really, really good track record, and really, really excited about the next phase.
Yeah. Yeah, that's your 115 million Series C that you just recently announced, right?
Yeah, we closed it end of last year and announced it a week or two ago. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Congrats on that.
Yeah, we're going to drill some holes. It's going to be great.
Yeah, do it. Found those raisins. I have 3 closing questions that I ask everybody.
Okay.
The first is, how optimistic or pessimistic are you about the future of the planet and why?
Oh, I'm pretty optimistic long term. And maybe in the near term there'll be some pain. But I think humans are incredibly resilient on net and smart and so forth, all these great attributes. And I think in the long term we will figure it out. I'm optimistic.
All right. Who's another company or individual doing something to address climate change that's inspiring you?
Oh, that's a good one.
No rush.
Individual.
Company or individual?
Company or individual.
Yeah. Somebody else, another startup or somebody in the ecosystem or...
Yeah, there's a lot.
Anybody?
There's a lot. That's a good question. Give me 2 seconds. Let me think about that. I should have prepped that.
Yeah, no rush. Well, maybe we should have told you it was coming. I don't know if we did.
I've never been asked that. It's a good question. Who do I look up to a lot? On the climate change side, well, I think maybe the simplest answer is I'm big fans of Fervo, and I think they've got a really great team, and they're doing something that's very hard. Very hard and a little bit scary. And I know it looks perfect from the outside, but I know how hard some of the things that they've had to go through. I don't know. I'm not on the inside, but I know enough to know how hard some of those problems are. And somebody needed to do it. And I think they're our best shot to get to that other side of unconventional geothermal. And so, yeah, I think Fervo's a great team.
Yeah, awesome. They feature pretty regularly in that question. I feel like, I got to get those guys on the pod. What advice do you have for someone not working in climate today who wants to do something to help?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, we had somebody recently that I think of now that you've asked this question, and she, MIT undergrad in engineering, and she went and worked at NASA on Mars rovers. And then she went back and did an MIT grad. She just has this incredible resume. And she showed up and said, look, I'm really interested in geothermal. I think it's one of our best shots. And I'm really concerned about climate change. And I just want to get in the door and help out in any way I can. And so she started like a couple weeks ago, and she's on the field teams. She's out like testing the predictions with the field crews. You know what I mean? Like just showed up and wanted to support, and she could have gone anywhere for sure. Like not anywhere, but like so many other places with more high profile positions. And she showed up when I'm like, I actually don't, there's lots of places I could put you. And she was sort of like, look, I want to get in at the ground level and I really want to understand what you're doing. And we were having discussions about it. And she's like, maybe the best place is just to start in the field. I was like, okay, let's go.
Yeah. Awesome. Really get a feel for it.
Yeah. So maybe that's my advice. I think like kind of look at the landscape and pick your bets. Where do you think, what do you think is going to work? And then get in the door.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Joel, that was awesome. Thanks a lot for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Great to meet you, Dylan. Appreciate it.
Hardware to Save a Planet is brought to you by Synapse. To find out more about us and how we develop hardware solutions for the world's most ambitious companies, head to synapse.com. And then make sure to search for Hardware to Save a Planet in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you like to listen. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Synapse, thanks for listening.